When Karen Thompson, the overbearing HOA president, rifled through Daniel Miller's personal mailbox without permission. It crossed a line no one expected. Her entitlement and obsession with controlling every detail of the neighborhood had turned ordinary life into constant stress and scrutiny. But Daniel had a clever, buzzing surprise ready that would teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Just wait until you see how the mailbox showdown unfolded, and how justice finally hummed through the cul-de-sac. When I first saw Karen Thompson, I could hardly believe my eyes. There she was, crouched over my mailbox, poking and prodding like it was a communal snack bin rather than my private property. I blinked, expecting some sort of trick of the light, maybe a neighbor's shadow or a reflection playing with my perception. But no, it was really her. Her floral blouse shimmered in the morning sun, and her oversized sunglasses sat tilted just slightly on her head as if she were posing for some high-maintenance magazine photo shoot, instead of conducting what could only be described as full-blown postal espionage. I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my lips, the warmth spreading in my hand, suddenly meaningless. I had heard stories about HOA presidents being overly meticulous, yes, but this was something entirely different. This wasn't about checking that hedges were trimmed or that lawn ornaments weren't too eclectic. No. Karen Thompson was digging through my personal correspondence like a treasure hunter in my life. Electric bills, a couple of coupons for cereal, a handwritten note from my mother. Nothing was sacred. And she didn't even flinch when I appeared at the edge of my driveway. Not a hint of guilt, not a sheepish wave, nothing. The thing that made it worse, what made my stomach flip like I had just fallen off a roller coaster, was the way she looked. That expression, so smug, so entitled, as though the universe had bent to accommodate her every whim, and I, a mere homeowner, had somehow failed to notice her supreme authority. It wasn't just snooping. It was a performance of control, a demonstration that I was under her microscope, every detail of my life under review. I realized with a sinking feeling that this was no random curiosity. Karen Thompson wasn't looking for information to satisfy her curiosity. She was hunting for a reason, any reason, to write me up, fine me, or drag me through some HOA bureaucratic nonsense that could ruin my day or worse, my week. I stood there, frozen, caught somewhere between disbelief and panic. For a moment I wondered if I should just storm over, grab her clipboard, and demand an explanation. But the rational side of my brain screamed, "Don't! Don't make it worse. Let her act first, gather evidence later." And that's when the full gravity hit me. In broad daylight on a perfectly ordinary Thursday morning, my personal space had been violated. Not by accident, not by mistake, but intentionally, systematically, with the precision of someone who had done this before. I felt my pulse spike, a mix of fear and something else, something like anger simmering under the surface, bubbling quietly because I wasn't ready to confront it yet. I remembered past complaints Karen had filed against neighbors for things as minor as slightly overgrown grass or a garden gnome positioned incorrectly. Those incidents had always seemed petty at the time, but now, witnessing her hands in my mailbox, it became crystal clear. Karen didn't just enforce rules, she lived for control, for asserting dominance, for turning the trivial into ammunition. And for the first time I realized I was on the receiving end of her obsession. I tried to rationalize it, to tell myself maybe she had a reason, some obscure regulation that justified her behavior. But logic crumbled under the sheer audacity of it all. I could see it now, the way she rifled through my mail with surgical precision, flipping papers between her fingers like a librarian judging a stack of overdue books. She didn't glance around, didn't seem aware of anyone watching, didn't care. And in that moment, as my brain tried to make sense of it, I felt a cold wave of shock wash over me. A sensation so pure and visceral, it left me rooted to the spot. It was the kind of violation that stops you in your tracks, the kind that makes your mind race in impossible directions. What else had she looked at? How long had she been doing this? How many others had already fallen victim to this relentless scrutiny? And in the same instant, beneath that initial shock, a quiet, burning anger began to take root. Because in her smugness, Karen Thompson had made one fundamental mistake. She had revealed herself. Her entitlement, her obsession with power, and her willingness to overstep boundaries were all on display, and now I knew the game had changed. I didn't move, I didn't speak. I just watched as she carefully placed the papers back in my mailbox, adjusted her sunglasses, and walked away down the sidewalk, humming softly as if she hadn't just trespassed. My mind reeled. My mailbox, had just become the battleground, and I could feel the first sparks of something bigger, something inevitable, igniting deep in my chest. See, I wasn't exactly the neighborhood golden boy. My name's Daniel Miller, and I'd bought the house 2 years ago after saving for what felt like a lifetime. I'd spent nights poring over listings, weekends mowing lawns, and countless mornings calculating budgets just to get here. This house was more than walls and a roof. It was my hard work made real, a place that I could finally call my own. I worked to keep it tidy, sure, my lawn was neat. The bushes trimmed just enough to look cared for without becoming obsessive. I painted the front door a muted blue that matched the mailbox, hung a welcome mat my mother had gifted me, and even planted a little herb garden along the side. But I had a tendency to see things differently than some people, namely Karen Thompson. While she saw a violation in a fence that wasn't perfectly aligned to the inch, I saw a home that felt lived in, a place that felt mine. And that apparently was a problem. Karen's memos were relentless. She'd issue them with the kind of precision usually reserved for court rulings. Repaint the fence, trim the shrubs, replace the mulch, rearrange the pavers. Sometimes she'd even send passive-aggressive notes with suggestions that weren't technically rules, like, Perhaps a more neutral color would enhance curb appeal, which basically translated to, "Your taste is unacceptable." I had been fined 3 tins for what I can only call nonsense. 3 times. For me, each fine wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a stark reminder that in her eyes I wasn't doing enough, wasn't proper, wasn't worthy of just living quietly in my own home. But the mailbox was sacred. That little metal box with its red flag wasn't just a place for letters. It was a private space, a small bubble of normalcy in the face of endless scrutiny. That was where I received letters from my mom, the ones that arrived like little hugs in envelope form. There were the utility bills and bank statements I preferred to handle privately. And there were the postcards from my fiancée, Rachel, when she traveled for work. Little snapshots of beaches, museums, and street markets around the world, each one carrying a piece of her that I could hold on to until she returned. Watching Karen's hands shuffle through that mailbox like she owned me, it made me feel small in a way that words can barely capture. It wasn't just intrusion. It was a statement. Your space, your privacy, your life, they're not yours. Her entitlement wrapped around me like a heavy curtain, and for the first time I felt what it meant to be completely powerless. All of my careful attention to the house, every effort to keep the peace with the HOA, every polite nod and smile at neighborhood meetings. It didn't matter. Karen's gaze and her actions said that none of it would ever be enough. And yet, there was something deeper than frustration, something that tightened my chest and made me ache. Not just anger, but compassion for myself. I realized how much I had invested emotionally in this place. How much these small rituals, the letters, the mail, the quiet mornings meant to me. And now they had been violated, stolen for a moment, and I felt the weight of that loss. It was a mixture of sadness and vulnerability, the kind that creeps in quietly until it feels impossible to ignore. Even worse, as I stood there, I thought about how many people might face this same kind of violation every day without anyone noticing. How many other homeowners had been scrutinized, fined, or shamed for minor things that didn't hurt anyone. My mailbox wasn't just a mailbox in that moment, it was a symbol of personal freedom. A place where I had the right to exist without judgment. Watching it desecrated by Karen's relentless authority stirred a quiet, burning empathy for anyone who had ever felt their boundaries trampled, their dignity ignored. And so I felt it all at once. The sting of unfairness, the ache of vulnerability, and a deeper, almost desperate compassion for myself. As I processed the reality of being under someone else's arbitrary control, I could hardly breathe. Not because of fear exactly, but because the violation felt intimate, personal, and undeniable. It was a moment that marked me, not just as a homeowner, but as someone learning the harsh truth about entitlement, privacy and the quiet ways people can be hurt without even touching you. In that moment, I understood something important. This wasn't just about a mailbox, it was about boundaries, dignity, and respect. And for the first time, I realized that I needed to do something, not impulsively, not recklessly, but intentionally to reclaim what was mine. Because allowing this to slide even once would only invite more of the same. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not even the gentle hum of the ceiling fan or the familiar creak of the floorboards in my old house could settle my mind. I kept replaying the scene over and over. Karen Thompson perched over my mailbox like a ruler inspecting a subject, shuffling through my private letters as if they were public property. I stared at the ceiling, my jaw tight, my hands clenched, and I felt something rise in me I hadn't fully experienced before. Pure simmering anger. It wasn't just this one incident. I remembered the countless stories neighbors whispered at HOA meetings and casual barbecues. Old Mr. Henderson had been fined simply for leaving his American flag out past sunset, the flagpole casting a shadow just a little too long for Karen's liking. She'd stormed the cul-de-sac, clipboard in hand, lecturing the Hendersons about community standards while ignoring the fact that nobody else cared or even noticed. Then there were the kids, riding bikes down the street with laughter trailing behind them like little echoes of summer. Karen had yelled at them from her porch, waving her hands in alarm over unsafe speed, frightening children who had done nothing more than enjoy themselves. And now it was me, my mailbox, my letters, my little sanctuary. That gnawing sense of injustice dug into me like a burr under my skin. This wasn't petty rule enforcement. It was tyranny disguised as concern, authority weaponized against anyone who didn't comply. And Karen, yoga pants, oversized sunglasses, floral blouse, wasn't just nosy. She was a tyrant in plain sight. She thrived on this control, and everyone else had learned to either bend or hide. I thought about my options. Filing a complaint? A waste of time. Karen ran the board. She controlled the meetings, the votes, and the paperwork. Any appeal would vanish into the HOA bureaucracy like a paper airplane swallowed by a storm drain. My frustration was boiling over. Sitting in bed, I could feel the heat behind my eyes, a deep-seated anger that demanded acknowledgement. I needed a plan, but it couldn't be hasty or reckless. This had to be precise, intentional. It had to hit in a way that made the point undeniable. That's when my mind landed on Jake, my buddy from down the street. Jake had been obsessed with beekeeping for years. His backyard was practically a small apiary buzzing with hives and the sweet scent of honey in the summer air. He loved the bees, respected their space, and understood the delicate balance of their behavior. And that's when the idea struck me, a spark as sharp and sudden as lightning. If Karen liked sticking her nose where it didn't belong, maybe it was time she got a buzzing reminder about boundaries. I pictured it in my head, a small container, ventilated just enough to release a controlled swarm, carefully placed inside the mailbox. No harm would come to anyone, not really. Just a startling wake-up call for someone who needed a reality check. The thought made my chest tighten with a mix of anticipation and delight. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't cruel. It was poetic justice in action. A way to reclaim my space and assert that nobody, not even the HOA president, could trample over my privacy without consequence. My anger wasn't blind. It was methodical. I spent the night sketching out a plan in my notebook, where I would place the camera, how to position the container so it wouldn't spill prematurely, how to ensure no one else was caught in the middle. Every detail mattered. I wasn't just venting frustration, I was strategizing a response that matched the audacity of Karen's intrusion. As the hours ticked past, my initial shock had fully transformed. The helplessness and fear were gone. They'd been replaced by a clear, almost intoxicating clarity. Action. I could see it vividly now, like a movie playing behind my closed eyelids. Karen Thompson, the self-proclaimed ruler of our cul-de-sac, getting a taste of her own medicine. Not out of spite, but out of necessity, because boundaries needed to be respected, and someone had to enforce that lesson in a way she wouldn't forget. By dawn, I was wide awake, adrenaline coursing, a grin tugging at the corner of my mouth. Anger had become focus, fury had become strategy, and the injustice I'd suffered had found a path to retribution. Not reckless vengeance, not harm, just a clever, undeniable statement that nobody had the right to treat someone else's life as if it belonged to them. Karen had trespassed. I was about to make sure she understood that her actions had consequences. The next morning I could barely sleep, my mind buzzing with anticipation. Jake and I had stayed up late the night before, carefully preparing the plan, double-checking every detail. The container of honeybees was small but secure, ventilated just enough so that opening the mailbox would release them gently yet dramatically. We had tested it a few times with his gloves on, making sure the bees stayed contained until the right moment. This wasn't about causing harm, it was about sending a message, reclaiming a sense of fairness that Karen Thompson had long ignored. I mounted a discreet GoPro across the street, partially hidden behind a hedge, giving us a perfect view of the mailbox without drawing attention. My hands shook slightly as I checked the angle, making sure the morning sun wouldn't wash out the footage. Every detail mattered. This was the culmination of weeks of frustration, sleepless nights, and growing tension. It wasn't just about pranking Karen. It was about asserting my right to privacy and dignity and making sure the neighborhood saw that boundaries mattered. Then, as if the universe had been waiting just for this moment, she appeared. Karen Thompson strutted down the street like she owned the neighborhood, wedge sandals clicking sharply against the pavement. Her floral blouse caught the sunlight, her oversized sunglasses tilted with the same imperious air as always, and her clipboard full of her usual meticulous notes. was clutched in one hand. She had no idea what was coming, and I could barely keep from laughing out loud. She tugged open the mailbox, expecting the usual letters, bills, perhaps another coupon she could judge. And then it happened. The container wobbled. The lid shifted just enough, and a small, furious cloud of bees burst into the morning air. Karen shrieked, a sound so high-pitched and unmistakable that it could only belong to her, and flailed her arms wildly. Her clipboard flew from her grasp, landing in a puddle with a soft splash. Sunglasses tumbled to the ground, perched askew like a little crown lost in defeat. She sprinted down the sidewalk, arms flailing at imaginary insects, her wedge sandals clacking like a metronome of chaos. I watched, my heart pounding, as she made a beeline for her SUV, swatting at the air as if the bees had followed her every step. For what felt like minutes, she attempted to regain composure, checking her hair, brushing off imaginary stings, muttering to herself about what had just happened. Every movement, every exclamation was poetry in motion. A perfect, absurd, satisfying dance of comeuppance. I replayed the GoPro footage later, frame by frame, laughing until my sides ached. And it wasn't just me. Within hours, the video had spread through our neighborhood group chat, a collective celebration of poetic justice. Neighbors who had quietly tolerated Karen's overbearing ways for years finally had proof of what they had suspected all along. Some shared stories about their own encounters. Others commented with emojis of shock, amusement, and sheer satisfaction. It was validation in its purest form. The little tyrant had finally met the consequences of her actions. Within a week, Karen was forced to step down as HOA president, citing stress in an official letter that only amplified the absurdity of it all. The news rippled through the neighborhood like wildfire, with people laughing and nodding in quiet agreement. It was justice, not in the harsh or mean-spirited sense, but in the sweet, undeniable truth that someone who had overstepped boundaries repeatedly had finally been reminded that no one is above respect and privacy. As for me, I returned to my mailbox with a calm I hadn't felt in months. Each letter I retrieved now carried a quiet sense of victory. Bills, postcards from Rachel, letters from my mom, they all seemed brighter, more satisfying, somehow sweeter in their ordinary presence. The mailbox, once a source of stress and violation, had been restored to its rightful place, a personal space, a sanctuary, a reminder that boundaries matter. Even more than that, there was a lingering joy in knowing that this small, clever act had shifted the balance. It wasn't just a prank. It was a statement. Fairness, dignity, and privacy are worth protecting, even when the odds seem stacked against you. And every morning, as I opened the mailbox and found a postcard or a bill waiting for me, I smiled, knowing that justice, subtle yet undeniable, had finally hummed through the neighborhood. buzzing gently like a reminder that no one, not even Karen Thompson, could trample over someone else's life unchecked.